Well, I could say, what would give, like, there are certain jobs, like which leave would protect my job. What is the most that I would be able to be paid, while I'm out. What am I eligible for is obviously the main one, right?
Thanks for listening to IBKR's Sense of Security. As always, there's more content at ibkrpodcast.com. And if you're interested in learning more about interactive brokers, visit ibkr.com. We offer more trading education content such as webinars, market commentary, market-related courses, and quant-related articles at ibkrcampus.com.
Welcome back to the Sense of Security podcast. I'm Cassidy Clement, Senior Manager of SEO and Content at Interactive Brokers. Today I'm your host for our podcast, and our guest is the Human Resources Director at Interactive Brokers, Michael Kerrigan. We're going to discuss medical and disability leave from work. Employees can become injured or sick on the job. So what are the options? Who qualifies? And will they still get paid? We'll discuss all that and more. Welcome to the program. Sure. So if an employee becomes injured, disabled, or sick on the job, what types of leave are allowed here in the United States?
So if we're talking about an individual who works for the company, I think that the primary thing people should do when this does happen and when this occurs is to have a conversation with their HR staff, because there are a multitude of different type of coverages. States are becoming more and more put in this paid leave plans especially recently, I think we're probably close to 9 different states that have it now, and it's just continuing growing. So it's beyond just federal coverage. It's also now we've gotten into states who actually instituted paid leave plans. Like State of Connecticut. State of Connecticut has a separate plan that basically now requires payment for a certain type of leave, whether you're sick, and it's all based on length of injury, like a length of illness or sickness or injury or recovery. Anything less than 5 or 6 days is typically, unless you are spending the night in the hospital, or spend the whole time in the hospital, probably would be covered under vacation. But if you do spend the whole night, then disability coverage would kick in. But if it was just I was sick, I had COVID, a lot of people had COVID, and I was only out for 3 or 4 days, that would not be covered by most disability plans, unless you're admitted into a hospital. But there's many different plans. They have FMLA, which is unpaid leave. The main thing is to kind of focus why you have these conversations is, you want to certainly look at a plan that protects your job. There's many types of leaves that, if you exhaust and you don't have those leaves available, because some of those leaves are based on coverage of how long you've been with the company. So FMLA probably wouldn't come into play unless you're with the company for a year. Some of these other plans don't have a requirement that you need to be here for a long period of time. So the main thing I encourage people is, if they know they're going to be sick, if they know they have a planned surgery where they're going to be out for a while or whatever the case is, they should have a conversation with their benefits or HR person to kind of get the full picture of what the company offers, what's available to them. They do have experts, whether it's in-house or whether talking to their broker, that would provide them additional information to allow them to kind of get a good landscape of what options are available. Because there are quite a lot, especially this day and age, that protect individuals. Some may be paid plans, some may be unpaid plans, but there are a lot of protections for staff so they can have the comfort to know that when they do return, they have a job.
So in my research, I've seen mandatory leave, voluntary leave, disabled veteran leave. How do those and others differ?
They're based on the coverage. Some of those plans are protected. Some of those plans are not protected. You have family medical leave. Some of those plans differ in length of time. Like FMLA is up to 12 weeks, but there's some caveats to that. So it's actually a rolling 12 weeks. So someone could not just be out for a full 12 weeks. They could have an intermittent FMLA where they took 2 days a week to be off and it was covered. And then as long as for the whole people, some people managed to have it, FMLA just continuance coverage just because they didn't exceed the limit over a 12-week period and could have it for a full year or more than a full year. Other plans like military leave are covered even for an injury or for military service. Those type of leaves. You also have we have voting leave. We have jury duty leave. There's a domestic violence leave that's actually coming. That's taking traction. That is a protected leave. Sick leaves. Not all companies have protected sick leave, but there's sick leave that covers specific for injuries. And then the one thing that people forget about is bereavement leave, right? Obviously that these are the different types of coverage that come into play that, people should consider, when looking for an employment, right? What factors come of that? Because these do protect your job. These are available for most companies, and some people forget about it until they need it. But it is good for people to do a little investigation before they join a company.
So in all of your comments there, you noted some key words or key phrases when talking about medical and disability leave, and those were FMLA, or Family and Medical Leave Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and then like Workman's Comp. Break down those acts or phrases or leaves, if you will, for our listeners, please?
Sure. So you have go backwards from what you said. So workers' compensation, is a type of insurance all companies have. They're required to have for employment for over, I believe it's either 5 or 50 employees. So you work for relatively large companies, you have that coverage. It's broken down by state. Even if you work remotely and work at home, you're covered. So in this day and age in the remote world, if I'm home and I fall while during my work period of time and I injure myself, that is covered under workman's compensation. It's basically it's income supplement. It includes medical expenses. So let's say, I don't know, you were at the office and you closed a file cabinet on your finger and you broke your finger. Workers' compensation is not just coverage for the time you don't be paid. It also is coverage that, if you had to pay $300, $400 out of pocket because that was the copay, workman's compensation could bridge that and basically reimburse you for that piece. And every company has it. Not all plans are there. The workers' compensation for paying while you're out, again, is incentivizing you to get back to work. Once the injury is fully recouped. And then one of the things you mentioned was American Disability Act. So this is a protection, right? This is a protection for those who have a disability, and it's basically allowing companies or making companies provide reasonable accommodations, as well as also prohibiting discrimination against for people who have disabilities. So similar to, when we have like race discrimination, gender discrimination, things like that, there is a disability discrimination. So you couldn't hire someone who is in a wheelchair to be an accountant, right? You couldn't say, well, they can't do the job because they're in the wheelchair, right? So if you're disabled, you have this protection, and it's utilized in many cases, to ensure that recruiting staff aren't discriminating against. It's also, a method for HR to kind of allow staff to give accommodations. Let's say I had bad eyesight and everybody used this certain type of monitor and I needed a different monitor. When you come in and you have this eyesight, you talk to HR, said, hey, for me to really do my job, I need this specific type of monitor that enhances the font to allow me to see it better. And if it's at a reasonable accommodation, companies should be adhering to it. If it cost $1 million, then that would be considered not reasonable, so they wouldn't be able to do it. But if it's a reasonable cost and reasonable accommodation, companies can do it. We've had cases, or I've not at this company, but other companies where drivers required, because their lower extremities weren't in full function, they still wanted to drive a car, and there was nothing preventing them to drive the car as long as they had this type of equipment in order to do the brakes and things like that. And that would be considered a reasonable accommodation if it was cost effective for them to do it because of whether their income or the value that person brought into the environment could be done. So, and then the last one is FMLA. So the FMLA is a big one. The FMLA is a federal law that entitles eligible employees of certain employers to take unpaid leave. It is job protected. It could be up to 12 weeks, as I mentioned before, but it's also available for intermittent leave. And it's not just, they've added enhancements to this plan, so it's not just if you get sick or if you get injured or whatever the case. It's also if you have to take care of someone else, like whether it's an elderly family member or a child family member, or if you wanted to take some time off because of adoption care, or you wanted to take some time off of, your spouse had a baby and needed some extra help all those things would come under FMLA.
So who would qualify for some of these types of leave that we've talked about today? I mean, you mentioned a few scenarios for FMLA, but who exactly would qualify for that? Are there different minimums as an employee?
So the minimum for the employee for FMLA is they have to be with the company for the year. So as long as you're with the company for the year, you are eligible to, let me caveat to that. So it's a year or 1,250 hours a year. So it's not, if you work, if once you hit one of those two, whichever is sooner plateaued, then you would be eligible to use and qualify for FMLA. For ADA, there is no real specifics. It's essentially if you qualify for or you have any sort of disability, whether it's eyesight, whether it's mental awareness, whether it's a physical disability or a mental disability, you would qualify. And the only thing you need to show is some valid reason what you're looking for accommodation, or so valid. It's hard in this day and age to, without them coming to tell you, you can't make an assumption that they can't do the job. As long as they can do the job, the disability doesn't make a difference.
So are employees' jobs kind of held if they have to go on these leaves? Like, are employers required to hold a job for the employee when one would take a leave?
Yes, majority of all the policies have job protection. However, there's always, the exception. If you're a performance issue prior to going on disability or prior to going on FMLA or prior to going on that, it doesn't mean that they can't terminate you while you're on FMLA. If they're, you throw caution to the wind because it's very hard to defend, but it doesn't mean that it's ultimately you can't. It's something can't happen to you. But most of these plans and leave plans are designed to give you some job protection, and it doesn't mean that you have to come back to the job that you left in. It just means you have to come back to a job that's equivalent in pay or equivalent in stature. So as long as there's some job, it doesn't have to be that exact job. So if you're out for FMLA for 12 weeks and the company went through some significant restructuring and you came back, and your job disappeared, as long as you offer them a job that was similar in pay, similar in stature, similar in the type of work, that would cover it.
So how about during that time paying for any benefits? Does the employee retain that during their time of leave?
That is something each company probably handles it differently. Most companies would still, companies like us, where we don't have premiums for some medical costs, which is a benefit for Interactive Brokers, is not available through a lot of companies. So a lot of companies, what they would do is that you would still be responsible for paying some of those premiums, whether you write a check each month and keep that cost down and they're able to cover that, or if you're not able to afford that, what would happen is they would do some deductions once you returned from the work to cap up or catch up for whatever you didn't pay while you're out. But you're still required to maintain those benefit costs and pay those costs while out on leave.
So within the medical versus disability leave, or you were saying FMLA, are the employers still required to pay the employees, or does that vary by the type of leave?
It varies by the type of benefit. Like short-term disability, they would pay some. Short-term disability is based on the company's structure and design. Like our plan, I think our plan is very favorable where you get salary continuance, but most companies do not offer that. It would be a percentage of up to a certain dollar amount. Some plans offer levels depending on the salary the person earns or the premium amount, or make you pay for it. Some companies offer basic disability where there is no cost to you, but you're paid up to a certain period, and then you have a supplemental insurance after. So it all depends on the plan. And then you also have where the state comes in, like California, Connecticut, New York. There's several other states that have paid leave plans that would offer additional income. Now, cumulatively, it should not ever go over what you earn on a normal basis. If it does, then that creates a challenge, or some of those plans won't cover.
So what questions should employees ask when they're reviewing any of the documentation or their options before going to, jump in for a type of work leave? What should they be asking themselves and their HR?
Well, I could say, what would give, like there are certain jobs, like which leave would protect my job. What is the most that I would be able to be paid, while I'm out. What am I eligible for is obviously the main one, right? That eliminates probably a lot of the plans that you think you are, and a lot of this depends, right? HR may not be. They can tell you what you're eligible for, but a lot of these plans would require doctors submitting documentation to other doctors that would authorize saying, yeah, this person qualifies. Most companies now have outsourced that process to third-party vendors who handle that because it is getting so complicated. So, it is, in this day and age, become very complex for someone when they are injured is what truly is available. We still have people that we find out that they were out for 2 weeks for an injury and they did nothing. They basically took vacation time for the 2 weeks, and because they didn't either know to ask or they didn't want to bother with it, or they had some sort of experience where some things got rejected in the past and they did not to do. So I highly encourage you to talk to your HR staff or your benefits staff, or if available, talk directly to the broker that's administering the plan, and they'll be able to provide all the options available to you.
That was actually on my questions list, was evaluating the leave to your PTO or vacation or sick time. So is that something that some employees or employers favor over another, or is that just something people look at first to just make it easier?
I think it all depends on the length, right? So if I'm going to be out for 6 days and short-term disability isn't going to kick in until after the fifth day, would it be worth it for me to do all this work and effort and documentation and file to get that extra day? If vacation time is very important to you, then yeah. But if it's not, then most people will probably just say, I'll just take the 6 days vacation. Because they have, some of these plans have probationary periods where basically you're going to be unpaid for a period of time until it kicks in. Again, it all depends on if you're immediately admitted to the hospital or, those type of things. But, it's all depends on the employee, but some employees, because they don't know, we have a lot of employees that come from other countries that don't have as good of plans for leave, and they expect to just do whatever they have to do. And then vice versa. There's countries that have much better plans and coverage. Then they come here and they realize that our plans aren't good enough. So you take it both ways. So.
Well, that was really helpful. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So as always, listeners can learn more about an array of financial topics for free at IBKRcampus.com. Follow us on your favorite podcast network and feel free to leave us a rating or review. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening to IBKR's Sense of Security. As always, there's more content at IBKRpodcast.com. And if you're interested in learning more about interactive brokers, visit IBKR.com. We offer more trading education content such as webinars, market commentary, market-related courses, and quant-related articles at IBKRcampus.com. The analysis in this material is provided for information only and is not and should not be construed as an offer to sell or the solicitation of an offer to buy any security. To the extent that this material discusses general market activity, industry or sector trends, or other broad-based economic or political conditions, it should not be construed as research or investment advice. To the extent that it includes references to specific securities, commodities, currencies, or other instruments, those references do not constitute a recommendation by IBKR to buy, sell, or hold such investments. This material does not and is not intended to take into account the particular financial conditions, investment objectives, or requirements of individual customers. Before acting on this material, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances, and as necessary, seek professional advice.